Hello, Missoula. This is Matt Anderson. I'm coming to you from the MCAT studio. Today I'm going to be going through one of Missoula Forum for Children and Youth's slideshows on media literacy. The topic of this slideshow is how alcohol companies, beer companies in particular, target our youth with their advertising. The name of this is You're the Target, and it's a media literature presentation by Peter D. and Company. Peter D. is one of the famous researchers and one of the most knowledgeable guys on media literacy and the effect it has on our youth. So we're going to go ahead and make our way through this presentation. Let's take a look at the first slide here. I thought before we get going on this, I'd give you a little bit of background on myself and where I'm coming from and how I got involved with doing this kind of stuff. So currently, I am working at Community Care here in Missoula. Community Care is one of our great youth services agencies in Missoula. Our mission is to provide a variety of alcohol, tobacco, and other drug prevention and early intervention programs for Missoula youth and their families. Our focus right now is mainly on doing MIP classes, which are minor in possession of alcohol classes. These are education-based programs for middle school, high school kids and their parents. So that's what I do. That's how I'm involved with this kind of work. So let's go ahead and hop into the slideshow and take a look at our first slide here. This is kind of an introduction to where we're coming from in terms of doing this sort of education around advertising. So if we look in the top corner here, we can read a quote. It says, "We do not target our advertising toward young people, period." This is a quote by Mr. Stephen Lambright. He was the president of Anheuser-Busch. I think we all know that they are the producer of Budweiser beer, the king of all beers, one of our more popular alcoholic beverages in this country. So obviously, with their popularity and their widespread advertising, they do have quite a bit of influence and exposure with our kids. And the message here of what we want to be saying is Anheuser-Busch and all alcohol companies, they're unfair to our parents. A common stance that they take is they blame parents for underage drinking. And what we're looking at is when they use these characters to sell beer, these are obviously things pictured here that are more addressing or geared towards young people, then it's difficult for our parents to fight against these things. So the question that I would pose to all of the viewers out there, do you think Mr. Lambright is lying to us by saying we do not target our advertising towards young people? So let's take a quick second to think about that, and we'll go through and take a look at our next slide here. So what we have here is one of the common characters used by Budweiser. This is from 1987. This is obviously Spuds MacKenzie. I remember Spuds MacKenzie from my childhood in 1987. I would have been 8 years old, and he was one of the common characters that my friends and I were very familiar with. At 8 years old, being familiar with a advertising slogan or a character of a beer company is probably not the thing that most parents would hope for. However, it's one of the things I definitely remember from watching television as a child. 1989, 2 years later, their common advertising character here was the Crypt Keeper. And for those of you that don't remember, this was from the show Tales from the Crypt. And so in 1989, I would have been about 10 years old. And I remember watching this show quite frequently. Saturday nights, I think it was on. Take a look at the next slide here. Budman, 1991. This was another character that they used to advertise Budweiser beer in the early 90s. Not one I'm particularly familiar with. I don't remember Budman. However, for the Simpsons fans out there that are familiar with Duffman, I think we can see the comparison here. Simpsons are famous for their, I would say, I guess, social criticism of the American society, advertising, things that are commonplace. And so we can see that Duffman was obviously their interpretation of Budman. Next we see here from 1993, the Budweiser Dalmatians. This is the same year that Disney came out with 101 Dalmatians movie. In 1995, Budweiser came out with their Frogs campaign. This was a campaign that ran for quite a while, as I remember, and was quite popular. Okay, in 1996, there were the Penguin cartoons. This was their advertising campaign in 96. And let's see, the third and final one, or the final one here, the third in the chain of animal inspired advertisements, or the frogs and the lizards here. And so what I find interesting here, what we'll take a look at a minute, is the use of animals. And we'll think about why animals are significant in terms of media literacy and understanding the intent of advertisements and understanding the intended audience of advertisements. So we'll think about animals in terms of that in just a second. So we'll take a break from moving through these slides and think about, again, the question of Anheuser-Busch, do they make ads for young people? And it seems that, at least to me, these are all, or seeing these ads anyways, bring back memories of my childhood, which means to me anyways that these made quite an impression on me when I was growing up. So another question for all of us to be thinking about is, if Budweiser is lying to us, or if other beer companies, advertisers, are lying to us through their ads in terms of who their intended audience is, what else in their advertising do we think is a lie, or should we question in terms of their honesty? And one thing that I think is important to consider, that we try to stress with our kids at Community Care, is how advertisements portray consequences or potential consequences of drinking. I think they tend to be portraying drinking as a very normal thing, a very common thing, and a very positive thing with little or no side effects or consequences, particularly long-term consequences. And I think that's really a troubling thing. We should be more honest with our kids. Our kids should have an opportunity to learn more about the long-term consequences of drinking, of their decisions. And advertisements tend to glorify drinking and tend to make maybe even the consequences of drinking a humorous and insignificant kind of thing. Now, another thing that I think about in terms of advertising in this way to young people is the meaning of a party. I had an interesting example recently doing a presentation to some middle school students about drinking and about the effects of drinking as a youth, as a young person. And after the presentation, I mentioned to these kids that there was an opportunity to go to a party that was being thrown by a group of high school students and was an alternative opportunity, an experience to go to a party, to be social, to have fun in a safe environment, in an alcohol-free environment. And a student very quickly raised his hand and said, "You told us not to drink, you told us about the dangers of drinking, and now you're telling us to go to a party. That doesn't make sense to me." And so I had to take a step back and explain to him that, well, this is a party, however, there's not going to be alcohol there. It's not a keg party. We're not there to go drinking. And I think it was an eye-opener for me, but also for the kids, too, that we can define party not only as consuming alcohol or not only as drinking and getting drunk, but simply as being social, as having fun. And I think that our culture of advertising plays a role in that young person's mentality of drinking being seen, or partying, being seen only as drinking and getting drunk. So let's, in sticking with the theme of middle school students, I guess, we could think about some of the research that's been done over the past years studying middle school students' response to alcohol ads in comparison to soda pop ads. This research has found out that more students like the ads for a product. If they like the ads for a product, they're more likely to actually like the product as well. Knowing this, the researchers wanted to find out what things in ads made the students like the ads better. So in doing their research, there were 3 things that came up more often than anything else in terms of what students liked more in ads, middle school students. So I mentioned earlier about why animals are significant, and this is where we're getting to now. So the 3 things that kept coming up with the middle school students in terms of what they liked from advertisements was humor, music, and then animals. And those were the three main things that they found most appealing in advertisements, or things that they felt were being advertised to them. So I think if we're going to talk about advertising, I think it's always important to mention the Super Bowl, to think about the Super Bowl. That's obviously what the most prominent day in terms of watching commercials, being impressed by commercials, and we actually look forward to watching these commercials and even being sold something, I suppose. So after the 2004 Super Bowl, let's see. Well, let's first take a look here. Let's move through the slideshow so we're not continuing to look at these frogs and lizards, and take a look at some of the advertisements that were actually ran during the 2004 Super Bowl and get an idea of what some of these were all about.
Since I was born, I dreamed of being a Budweiser Clydesdale. Only problem is, I was born a donkey. So all my life, I practiced the Clydesdale walk and the Clydesdale pull. I even tried hair extensions on my lower legs. And then came my big interview. They looked me in the eye and said, "What makes you think you can be a Clydesdale, son?" And what was my answer? I must have said something right.
Okay, so there's one Budweiser advertisement. We'll move on to the next.
Hey, nice dog. Yeah, this is Piper. Purebred border collie. Watch this. Piper, fetch. Good boy, Piper. You're such a smart dog. So, what can your dog do? Fergus? Bud Light.
Bad dog. Fresh, smooth, real Bud Light. It's all here.
Okay, we'll keep moving forward. There's 2 more of these to take a look at.
I love your apartment, Brian. And Frank is so well behaved.
Yeah, we're best buddies. I'm gonna grab some Bud Lights.
Okay. You're so cute.
I think you're cute, too.
You talk?
Baby, I do a little bit more than just talk. Well, let's cut the chit-chat, head upstairs, or we can, you know... Whoa, here he comes. Act natural.
Fresh, smooth, real Bud Light.
I'll be right back.
So how do you feel about back hair?
It's all here.
And the final Super Bowl commercial to take a look at.
This is so romantic.
Well, it's about to get a little bit more romantic. A little candlelight.
Oh.
And a little Bud Light. Do you smell barbecue? Oh,
Fresh, smooth, real Bud Light.
cool, a rocket sled.
It's all here.
Okay. So we'll take a minute to think about this, and then we'll get into this next slide that we're seeing here. So obviously these were all commercials that ran during the 2004 Super Bowl. They're all a take on the animal theme of advertising beer to young people. And so the idea here, I think, is to have a variety of approaches towards using the animal theme so that you're appealing to a variety of audience members. So in terms of just the amount of exposure and looking a little bit about the influence that this exposure has to our kids, we know that television ratings showed that at any given time, about 14 million people below age 18 were watching the 2004 Super Bowl. 7 million of those were kids under 11 years old. So that's a obviously huge number of kids being exposed to these commercials. And then some of the research that was done after the Super Bowl, a poll that was done of 2,000 middle school students, showed that 76% of those students said they liked the beer ads they saw in the Super Bowl. 49% said their favorite ad in the Super Bowl was a beer ad. 66% said the funniest ad was a beer ad. And then, to me, the most significant one and the final one is 52% said the beer ads in the Super Bowl encouraged people their age to drink. So, to me, this is our youth telling us as adults that these advertisements do have an impact on them, or at least they're recognizing that these are encouraging them to drink. And being bombarded by the ads, and that's what we'll take a look at next, how much exposure there is, being bombarded by these ads and knowing that they're having an effect, then I think this is definitely a piece that plays a role in the amount of drinking that does go on with our young people. So if we look at the graph that we're seeing here, youth exposure to 2001 television advertising, and we're looking at beer, the red line here, the top line, versus other products that are commonly advertised to youth, to young kids. These are Nielsen ratings that we're looking at. So these points, I would say that beer and ale points are about 17 or 18,000. So these are describing the number of people who see a certain ad or a television commercial. So what we're seeing here is that youth are being exposed to far more beer and alcohol commercials than really any of the other top products that are being advertised to kids. Even jeans, sneakers, some of the things that we just associate with being sold to young kids and that sort of thing. So lots of kids obviously are watching commercials. There's a ton of exposure to these advertisements, and our kids are telling us that these advertisements are having an effect on them and their decisions as well. And here, this is an interesting one. What we're looking at here, the red bars are youth, again, these ratings, youth exposure to a variety of different alcoholic beverages. Again, we're seeing the highest number here being beer and other ale products, the lowest being distilled spirits, wine, or other kinds of wine coolers, that sort of thing. So I think what we're seeing here is an effort by alcohol companies to focus their beer advertising to a specific target, to young people, youth, 12 to 20 years old, knowing very well that that's what they're more likely to drink, and that's what they have access to more than other products, and that's what their palate is ready to accept. Maybe they're not ready to accept wine or other liquors, so they don't try to advertise those products to a kid. So they know very well what a kid is more likely to drink, what they have access to, and then they target their advertising to those young people and in ways that's more appealing to those young people. If we think about, other than TV commercials, print advertisement, magazines, Again, it's not surprising that alcohol companies are advertising mainly in publications whose readers are young, who are under 21. So the top 10 magazines that are sold to kids, the 10 magazines who have 25% or more of their readers below the age of 20, have 1/3 of all alcohol advertising for magazines. So these would include magazines such as Vibe, as Spin, Rolling Stone, Allure, Car and Driver, Maxim, Glamour, Motor Trend, InStyle, of course, Sports Illustrated. So these are the magazines that are being read mainly by young people, and the magazines that young people do read. They're not going to be reading as much National Geographic or New Yorker, the kinds of magazines that adults are reading. And if you take a moment to think or to look into a National Geographic, look into a New Yorker, you're not going to see Miller Lite ads. You're not going to see Budweiser ads or Michelob ads. You may see an ad for a vineyard in Northern California, but not necessarily a beer ad. And that's for a purpose. That's particular by the alcohol companies. So let's see. Let's pull up something here. This is a little bit more information on the extent to which advertisers are going to access kids where they are. So here are the magazines we can see: Vibe, Spin, Rolling Stone, etc., that I just mentioned up on the top here. Has their number of youth readers, and they're huge. Rolling Stone, over 4 million readers. Vibe, over 3 million, close to 4 million readers. And the next column we can look at is the percentage of readers who are youth, who are 12 to 20 of these magazines. And it's all, let's see, 41% for Vibe, 35% for Rolling Stone. So a big percentage of their readers, in some cases close to half of their readers, are under the age to drink. Now, if we look at the amount of money that alcohol ads or alcohol advertisers are spending in these magazines, they're huge amounts of money being directed towards kids to get them to associate with drinking and make the decision to drink ultimately. So we're seeing 3 million. Wow, Rolling Stone, $19 million. Maxim, $20 million. These are huge figures. This is big money that's being thrown at our kids to encourage them to drink, to associate positive outcomes of drinking, to associate normalcy with drinking, and to do very little and, in fact, really make an attempt not to show anything that would be in contradiction to the idea of drinking being normal. We can cruise down here and look a little bit further. Brands advertising only in youth-oriented publications. So these are the brands that advertise only in publications whose readers are 12 to 20 years old. And so Miller Lite, Heineken, Bacardi, Sky, Cutty Sark, and we can see the amount of money that they're spending on an annual basis. It's again huge. It's in the millions, 4 million, 3 million. So again, this just goes to show the amount of effort being made to expose our kids to advertisements, to messages that encourage them to drink. Okay. One kind of side note that I like to make with our kids at Community Care is knowledge that alcohol advertisers have, and that we as prevention specialists have as well, on research that shows adolescent brain activity or brain response to alcohol commercials. And we can see clearly that there's a significant difference in the response that drinkers, young kids that have been drinking, have to ads compared to young kids that have never drank. The kids that have never drank, their brain response is pretty neutral. It's not significant in any real way. However, the drinkers are having a tremendous amount of brain activity go on when they see commercials for drinking. And what that tells us is that's a reinforcer for kids. Memories are being flooded in their brain when they see these advertisements. And advertisers can play on that. They can pull out the themes of humor and of animals and of some of the other things that we've been talking about. So there's a very very specific effort being made on behalf of advertisers to do very specific things with their commercials. Now, what we want to do is maybe take a look at some commercials and just think about how these commercials are potentially influencing our kids. So we'll take a look at this one here.
Lincoln Financial Group battle at Bighorn on ABC Sports. Brought to you by Killian's Irish Red, which reminds you, one look says a lot. The Stanley Cup Finals on ABC. Brought to you by Zima, clearly refreshing. Killian's Irish Red, which reminds you, one look says a lot. Bud Light, the proud supporter of the NHL. And Original Coors, nothing beats an original.
Original Coors storyline in this Game 7. Joe Sakic, a goal and assist. And our Original Coors replay, we will go back to Game 3.
The NFL on CBS is sponsored by Budweiser, with a crisp, clean, refreshing taste you'll find in no other beer. And by Bud Light, for the great taste that won't fill you up and never lets you down, make it a Bud Light.
La República Deportiva es presentada por Coors Light. Este breve de República Deportiva es presentado por Tecate.
The NBA on NBC is brought to you by Miller Lite. Grab a Miller Lite. It's Miller time. The smooth, satisfying taste of Michelob Light. Beer or Michelob Light. By Coors Light, proud partner of the John Wayne Cancer Institute and their search for a cure. By Zima, clearly refreshing.
The Belmont Stakes, brought to you by Budweiser, with the crisp, clean, refreshing taste you'll find in no other beer.
Budweiser, official beer of NASCAR and proud sponsor of the Bud Pole Award.
By Miller Lite. Grab a Miller Lite. It's Miller time. By Budweiser, with the crisp, clean, refreshing taste you'll find in no other beer. Brought to you by Rocky Mountain Cold Coors Light. Are you ready for a cold one?
Brought to you by Corona Extra, miles away from ordinary.
Okay. So what we're seeing here is that pretty much all of our sporting events that we enjoy watching on TV are brought to us by alcohol companies. So not surprisingly, we can know that alcohol companies are our third largest advertiser on TV. So drug companies being number 1, car companies being number 2, alcohol companies being number 3. And what's interesting to me to think about is that the connection being made here is that sports and alcohol are a natural combination, that they're meant to go together. Our sports are to be brought to us by alcohol companies or to be sponsored by alcohol companies. And it's confusing to me because really those two things, alcohol and athletics or alcohol and sports, alcohol and driving, alcohol and car racing, seem to me to be a natural conflict of each other. You can't really be the best at your sport to be performing at a high level, to be driving a car, of course, when you've been consuming alcohol or when you're drinking. The two of those things just don't really go all that well together. So it's sending a message to our kids that could be difficult to interpret, but as adults, as people that do prevention, as people that play a role in the lives of our kids and that are positive influences with our kids, we can certainly take the time and sit down with our kids when they watch these things, or when they mention something to us, or whenever we have a moment, we can talk to them about these ideas and explain to them that what advertising is intending to do, that they're selling an idea, the idea isn't necessarily true, and that we have to be filters for our kids, and our kids have to be filters for themselves too. They need to understand how to read these messages and how to interpret these messages, and we can help them do that. As adults, we understand these things, and we understand the intent of advertising, and we understand the dishonesty that can take place in advertising, and we can help our kids learn how to be filters for themselves. With that said, let's move on to another clip here. What's great about these presentations is that Peter D. and his folks are able to compile all these wonderful clips for us, and then all we have to do is sit back and enjoy. Okay. Let's pull up the front page here. Actually, let's go here. This is a nice slide to remind us of what we've been doing for the past 30 minutes or so. So that last clip was the final clip of this slideshow. And what we were seeing there were examples of product placement. I think we're all pretty familiar with the idea of product placement. It's the ability of an advertiser to put their product in the flow of a show or the flow of a movie or the flow of a sports event without breaking it up with an actual commercial. And so that's what we were seeing in that slide, in that video clip. And so there were a lot of different examples of the outfield or of a car hood or just different ways that products were placed in the shot. And those, of course, weren't by accident. That's a strategy of advertisers to catch shots of their product, of their beer company or what have you, in the flow of the show. And again, the amount of money that these people are spending is out of this world. There are people that are being paid during those sporting events or shows or what have you. They're being paid as much as $300,000, $400,000 a year just to make sure that they catch that opportunity of the car hood racing by or the guy making an outfield pop fly catch with a big Bud Light billboard behind him. So these are very intended shots and not by accident by any means. And just another example of how advertisers kind of work their magic. So that's the slideshow. I think it's a great presentation. I think to wrap up, we kind of just think back on what the lessons are here. One is understanding media literacy. Media literacy is simply the ability to understand and interpret messages and the intent of those messages that come across from radio ads, TV ads, print ads, what have you. And it's being critical of those. It's understanding what we're being sold and then understanding what the truth is. Let's read this quote again. "We do not target our advertising toward young people, period." I think what we've seen here is that advertisers, alcohol companies and their advertisers are certainly targeting young people, particularly the 12 to 20-year-olds. That's the age range when people are beginning to use alcohol. That's the age range where you can build product loyalty. So, of course, they're targeting those people. Our kids are telling us that they're being targeted. They see it. They recognize it. The problem being these commercials are not necessarily being honest. They're putting a lot of weight on adults, on parents, on prevention specialists to be the interpreter, to be the filter. And that's kind of the message of this presentation, is that as adults, as people that have contact with young kids, we should take the time, perhaps not every day, but we should take the time to watch television with our kids, to sit down and interpret commercials with them, to allow them to practice being the filters, ask them what they think the message is, ask them what they think the truth is. And in doing that, we can really make a difference. We can show our kids that there are influences out there, and there are big influences, and they're not just advertisers. They can be friends or people in the community. There are lots of different influences out there that play a role in the decisions that our kids make. And this is just part of it, but this is certainly a significant part of it. We can see that by the billions of dollars that are being spent every year. I believe it's about $4 billion, if I'm remembering my number correctly, in terms of the amount of money that's spent annually advertising alcohol. So there's a big driving force out there to get kids to drink, and to drink without an understanding of consequence. And that's what we do at Community Care. We try to raise that awareness, that there are consequences, and that your decision to drink will affect you today and will affect you tomorrow and down the road. And we raise that awareness with parents and with kids, and everybody in the community has a connection with the kids some way. It's up to us to find that way and to help our kids understand the influences that are there, and to help be a filter for them with these types of messages. So in closing, that's the task that I present to everybody that's enjoyed this presentation. And together as a community that takes pride in our youth and having healthy, resilient kids in our community, then I think we'll all take the time to do that. So this is Matt Anderson signing off from MCAT Studio. Thank you very much.